She walks toward the checkpoint slowly, like she has nowhere else to be. 2 German soldiers stand guard, rifles ready, orders clear, stop the woman they call the White Mouse. A 5-million-franc reward waits for whoever catches her. She looks the nearest soldier in the eye, smiles, and asks if he would like to search her. He laughs. He waves her through. She has just walked past the men hunting her, on a road controlled by an army that cannot see what is right in front of it. This is not luck. It is a skill, sharpened over years of danger, and it will help decide the outcome of a war. Her name is Nancy Wake. Before the checkpoints, before the code name, before the bounty on her head, she was simply a young woman from the other side of the world, trying to build a life in Europe. She was born in 1912 in New Zealand and raised in Australia, and at 16 she ran away from home with almost nothing. She wanted to see the world, and she found her way into journalism, working as a reporter across Europe in the 1930s. In Vienna, she watched something that never left her. She saw Nazi supporters beating Jewish men in the street, dragging them through public squares while crowds did nothing. She later said she made a private decision that day: if she ever had the chance to fight against what she had witnessed, she would take it. That decision would shape the rest of her life, though she did not yet know how far it would take her. In 1939, she married Henri Fiocca, a wealthy French industrialist, and settled into a comfortable life in Marseille. It looked, from the outside, like the kind of life many people dream of. But that same year, war broke out across Europe, and within months, German forces occupied northern France. The south remained officially unoccupied, run by a French government that cooperated with the Nazis. Comfort was no longer an option for someone who had already made her choice in Vienna. Nancy and Henri joined the growing resistance movement. She began as a courier, carrying messages and supplies between resistance cells, work that demanded nerve rather than weapons. Soon she was doing something far more dangerous, helping smuggle Allied airmen and escaped prisoners out of France, guiding them along secret routes toward neutral Spain. Over time, she helped more than 600 men reach safety. Each trip meant crossing checkpoints, lying to soldiers, and trusting strangers who could betray her at any moment. The Gestapo noticed. They began intercepting members of her network, and eventually they connected the pattern of escapes to one woman who kept slipping through their fingers. They gave her a nickname, the White Mouse, for her uncanny ability to vanish just as they closed in. By 1943, she was the most wanted person on their list in France, with that 5-million-franc price on her head. If you find stories like this one gripping, the kind where ordinary courage meets extraordinary danger, you might enjoy following along as more of these hidden histories come to light. The pressure became impossible to ignore. Members of her network were being arrested one by one, and it was only a matter of time before someone talked. Resistance leaders finally told her what she already suspected: she had to leave France immediately, or she would be caught. She traveled to Toulouse to arrange her escape, and there, the Gestapo caught her. She spent for days in custody before an unlikely figure secured her release, an Irish Catholic priest named Hugh O'Fletty, working through his own underground network to save people from the Nazis. She was free again, but freedom did not mean safety. Getting out of France proved far harder than getting caught in it. She attempted the crossing into Spain 5 times and failed each time, turned back by patrols, bad luck, and the sheer difficulty of moving unseen through mountains crawling with enemy soldiers. On her 6th attempt, she made it. She crossed the Pyrenees on foot, through freezing conditions, and reached neutral Spain exhausted but alive. From there, she traveled on to Britain. She had escaped the country she loved, but she had not escaped the fight. In Britain, Nancy joined the Special Operations Executive, a secret organization created to support resistance movements and sabotage German operations across occupied Europe. She was one of only 39 women trained by the SOE to work directly with the French resistance. Her instructors noted her sharp instincts, her exceptional marksmanship, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She trained in weapons handling, demolition, and hand-to-hand combat, learning skills that had nothing to do with the journalist she had once been. There is a strongly supported detail from this period that shows exactly how far she was willing to go. During a later mission, she killed a German sentry with a single blow, using the unarmed combat training she had received to stop him from raising an alarm that would have exposed her team. It was not the kind of story anyone tells for excitement. It was survival, decided in a single silent second. On April 29, 1944, Nancy parachuted into the Auvergne region of central France as part of a three-person SOE team. Her landing did not go as planned. Her parachute caught in a tree, and she hung there, tangled, until a local Marquis leader named Henri Tardivat arrived and looked up at her with a grin, joking that he hoped all the trees in France would bear such beautiful fruit that year. She was not in the mood for charm. She told him, in blunt terms, to stop the French flattery and get her down. That exchange became one of the more human, almost funny, moments in a mission built entirely around danger, and it marked the beginning of one of the most effective partnerships of the French resistance. Her task in the Auvergne was enormous. She had to unite scattered, poorly equipped resistance cells into a fighting force capable of supporting the coming Allied invasion. She organized parachute drops of weapons and cash, trained fighters in sabotage, and worked to hold together a coalition of independent-minded guerrilla groups who did not always trust outsiders, let alone a woman sent from London. Her success was remarkable. Under her coordination, the Marquis in the Auvergne grew to roughly 7,500 fighters, and they caused more disruption to German operations than resistance groups in almost any other region of France. In June 1944, just after the D-Day landings, disaster struck. 500 Marquis fighters clashed with a much larger German force, backed by tanks, artillery, and aircraft. The battle was a defeat. Nancy ordered an immediate withdrawal to prevent further losses, but the crisis was not over. The retreat had forced her radio operator to burn the group's codebooks to keep them from falling into enemy hands. Without those codes, there was no way to communicate securely with other resistance cells, no way to warn them, coordinate with them, or call in the supplies they desperately needed. There was only one option left, and it depended entirely on her. Nancy Wake got on a bicycle and rode more than 500 kilometers through German-occupied territory, from the Auvergne to Châteauroux and back, in just 72 hours. She pedaled through checkpoints, past patrols, through exhaustion that most people never experience, to reach another resistance cell and restore contact between the scattered groups. When she finally got off the bicycle, she could barely stand. In an interview years later, she said that when people asked what she was most proud of during the entire war, her answer was always the same: the bicycle ride. It is a strange thing to be proudest of, out of everything she did. But it captures something true about her kind of courage. It was not one dramatic act. It was endurance, chosen again and again, at moments when quitting would have been forgivable. When France was finally liberated later that year, Nancy learned something that shattered her. Her husband, Henri, had stayed behind in Marseille to continue supporting the resistance after she fled. The Gestapo had captured him, tortured him for information about her, and executed him. He had never given her up. She had spent more than a year risking her life across France without knowing that the man she loved had already paid the ultimate price to protect her secret. Friends who knew her later said she carried a private guilt about his death for the rest of her life, even though the choice to stay had been his alone. If her story stays with you the way it has stayed with so many people who study this period, it might be worth exploring what happened to the wider network of resistance fighters she worked beside, many of whom never lived to tell their own stories. By the war's end, Nancy Wake had become the most decorated servicewoman of the Second World War. She received the George Medal from Britain, the Croix de Guerre from France on 3 separate occasions, the Legion of Honor, the Medal of Freedom from the United States, and several other honors from the countries she had called home. The woman who had once been a runaway teenager and then a journalist watching helplessly from a Vienna sidewalk had become someone entire armies had failed to stop. She continued to serve with the SOE for years after the war ended, and she eventually remarried, settling into a quieter life that still carried the weight of everything she had lived through. She gave interviews decades later, sharp and unsentimental, rarely dwelling on the horror of what she had seen and done, more likely to make a joke than accept praise. She lived to be 98 years old, passing away in London in 2011, one of the last living links to a network of ordinary people who had decided that occupation was not something they could accept. So how does one woman fool an entire army? Not with a single trick, and not through luck that happened to hold. She did it through a wink at a checkpoint, and a bicycle ride that nearly broke her body, and a single silent blow that saved a mission, and 6 attempts across a mountain range before the 7th, if it had been needed, might never have come. She did it by making herself impossible to predict, in a war built on control and order. The Gestapo had files, informants, and an entire occupying army, and none of it was enough, because they were hunting a woman who had already decided, back on a street in Vienna, exactly what she was willing to risk. That decision outlasted the checkpoints, outlasted the bounty on her head, and outlasted the war itself. It is still here, in the simple fact that her name is remembered, and theirs mostly are not. There are so many stories like hers still waiting to be uncovered, quiet moments of courage buried inside the larger history books rarely have room for. If this kind of history speaks to you, it's worth keeping an ear open for the next one, and maybe letting the English come along with it.